Hi, welcome. Welcome to Fat Mascara, podcast about beauty culture. I'm Jen Sullivan, often joined by Jessica Matlin, except there are some Fridays like this one where I go rogue and get to do my own interviews. That's what's happening today. Actually, you know what? Before we get into the interview, I wanted to try something new. A podcast that Jess and I love called the Polyester Podcast. They do this at the top of their show. I think it's such a great idea. They shout out any new reviews they get. And I love that because, as you may or may not know, reviews are how we help grow our audience. And when our audience grows, we can put out more great interviews like the one you're about to hear. Anyway, so I'm going to start reading. We'll do this from time to time. I'm not going to do this every time. Start reading a new review when we have them. TBD if I'll include the negative reviews, but they're always fun too. But this is a great one we just got on Apple. It was a 5-star review. Here it goes. Such a great host-driven show and love the more unique beauty topics. As someone who isn't in the beauty space, I'm able to learn so much and be entertained along the way. Exclamation point. That is from Sprungy Sprung. We love you, Sprungy Sprung. I think if that's who you are, you're going to love this episode because you'll learn and be entertained along the way. Let's get into it. We are getting historical. I don't know about you, but I loved our episode this past summer with journalist Rachel Gibson, who goes by @thehairhistorian on Instagram. So I wanted to know even more. And you know who came to my rescue? Elizabeth L. Block. So Liz is an art historian. She has a PhD in art history from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, an MA in American Studies from Columbia University, and a BA in English and art history from the George Washington University. She works for the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York. And just last week, she published her second book, Beyond Vanity, The History and Power of Hairdressing. So we're mostly talking about that because the stories she uncovered are fascinating. But she also happens to be a listener of the podcast and a beauty aficionado. So stick around until the end because her product recommendations are really great too. Okay, let's get into it. Liz, welcome to Fat Mascara. Hi.
Thank you. This is so great.
I'm so excited to have you here. I know you're a listener too, so this will be fun. I was joking with Jess that like everybody who works in fashion magazines, I feel like, or like a majority has an art history major. And it's always like, oh yeah, the art history majors, they all go to work at fashion magazines. And then I met you virtually, and you're like the art historian who became an art historian. So you're like the real deal. Tell me what drew you to this line of work and what you do for your day job.
My trajectory was a lot more straightforward than for a lot of people, but my first encounter with art history was in 3rd grade, and I bought my first reproduction print in 3rd grade on a field trip to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. I grew up outside of Boston, and we had this like series of 4 trips to the MFA in 3rd grade, and we went to the American wing there, the American galleries, and I just was instantly drawn to the American paintings. I know it sounds really silly to say that it all started when I was 8 years old, but it really did, and that print—
What card did you buy? What was the print?
Yeah, it was a little bit bigger than a postcard, and I put it up on my wall in my room.
Which artwork?
Yeah, it was a portrait called The Torn Hat by Thomas Sully. It's 1820. And it's this really sweet young boy. He's probably about 6 years old. Of course, it's still in the MFA. And he has these rosy cheeks and this like really kind of peaches and cream complexion, but he's of the lower classes and he has a torn hat. And the painting is called The Torn Hat. And I just had it on my wall forever, probably until I went to college.
Yeah. And so now you actually work in an art museum, right? What do you do all day?
Yeah. I work in the Metropolitan Museum of Art here
Not
in New York.
Not a art museum, the art museum.
It's a pretty big one. And I'm a senior editor in the publications and editorial department, which means that I edit exhibition catalogs. I am the managing editor of our academic journal, Metropolitan Museum Journal. And so I get to work on art history writing from ancient through contemporary art with lots of colleagues around the museum and from all over the world. And it's just the best. I love editing other people's work and then also doing my own research and writing.
As I can see with your new book, Beyond Vanity. This makes sense to me, though, that the trigger painting back then was an American painting, because the book focuses, just if people are thinking as they're listening to this conversation, wow, they're really talking a lot about the United States and a little bit Europe and this very specific time period. But that was intentional. That's the focus of your book. Tell us what that time period and what the artworks we're talking about, but like, why that period? Why did that interest you enough to write a book?
So my area of focus, I can't say it came directly from third grade, but through going through all the schooling that I did in graduate school, my area of focus has been late 19th century painting of the United States. So we're talking about John Singer Sargent, Cecilia Beaux, Mary Cassatt, Eastman Johnson, Winslow Homer. Those are my favorites. And that sort of veered into a focus on portraits of women and then into the visual and material aspects of women's lives. So that's really where this focus comes in. My first book, Dressing Up, was on Gilded Age fashion. So the top 1% of women in the United States who were going to Paris and buying the best of the best fashion there. And the way that this book differs is that, I mean, hair is universal. Everyone can relate to hair in one way or another, even if they've lost it, as opposed to Gilded Age women who only a very, very, very small few people could buy a house of worth gown for the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars. But everyone can relate to hairdressing, caring for your hair. And so I became interested in looking at hairstyles in these paintings from the late 19th century. So specifically in my area of passion and what I focus on in this book is post-Civil War, so 1865 to 1900. So that's my sweet spot area where like I just have so many more research topics.
There was a lot going on then, which we'll get into. But you mentioned the Gilded Age, which of course made me think of the Gilded Age as a TV show. And I was thinking about this, that a lot of us have our concept of what we think history was like based on movies and film. Do you watch something like the Gilded Age, which is like right in your sweet spot, and just like, do they get it wrong? Are you sitting there being like, that's not what it was like? I've studied this. What are you doing when you're watching a historical film or TV show?
Okay, so I finished my rewatch of season 1
okay, so you've
and
seen
2
okay, good.
of Gilded Age. So I have so much admiration for the hair team there and for the costume team. It's much easier for me to swallow the hair treatment in the show than it is the costume treatment. So for like Louisa Jacobson's character, she plays Marianne Brooke, and she's like this young...
This is the blonde.
Yes,
okay.
But it's a blonde wig. So if you look at Louisa Jacobson's Instagram, she posts these incredible videos of the hair team putting on the blonde wig. So she has like brown straight hair, but they like affix this blonde curly wig to her head before they film. And they're filming season 3 right now. So I'm like obsessed with following where they are. They're in like Albany, New York, and Troy, New York. But I think they do a great job on the hair. So for hers, she has these kind of like curly bangs that frame her forehead, and that's very much of the moment, spot on for mid to late 1880s. I think that's right on target. And for some of the other characters like Aunt Ada and Agnes, so Christine Baranski and Cynthia Nixon, I think they do just a marvelous job with that kind of, in a way, dowdy and dark brown, just like really pinned close to the head, and with like maybe like an heirloom hairpin in there. I think that's spot on. What drives me nuts in these shows, though, is, and we have to bring up Bridgerton, and then there was this other one called The Buccaneers that was on Apple TV not so long ago. So I watched that one, and the aspect that just drives me bonkers is that they will show young women over the age of 16 with their hair down, which just would not have happened. So when you were a woman in this period, when you were a girl, you would wear your hair down until about the age of 16. And then when you were kind of coming onto the marriage market within the next couple of years, you would be required in respectable society to pin up your hair into some type of updo, again, close to the head and styled with, you might put a piece of hair jewelry.
And this was for all classes, all races, like hair would be done after that age.
Yeah, so we're mostly talking middle and upper classes here, hair done. So the respectability politics coming into play here. For the lower classes, they would also pin up their hair because they wanted to keep it clean. And if they were out working, they would want to keep their hair either covered or protected from dust and from sun. But specifically with the Gilded Age and with that show, The Buccaneers, like it was a fun show, but like these young women, they're like on the marriage mark and then they're like marrying and their hair is like down and in a ponytail and flying. And that is just something that you would see on young girls only in reality.
Well, for me, it's always the teeth, because whenever I watch like a historical movie, I'm like, no one's teeth would be looking like that.
Oh, yeah, teeth and eyebrows, right? Like sometimes the eyebrows are groomed.
Plucked.
Yes. So eyebrows, but the teeth, that's such a good point. Yeah. Right.
All actors have good teeth. But you mentioned that you wouldn't wear your hair down after a certain age. And it makes me think of, first of all, your book is filled with artworks I haven't seen before. And I feel like being this my job, I know somewhat about the history of what beauty looks like in painting and in catalogs and things. There were so many new artworks. There was this whole chapter almost about bicycles and how like bicycles felt like the race cars of their ages and kind of sexy, and to sell bicycles to men. There was this one poster of 4 women lined up on a bicycle in like full clothing, but their hair was loose. And you explained that, oh no, this was like a racy image, right?
Yeah. So that image, it's one of my favorites. It's really crazy illustration, really colorful, like a poster and an advertisement for a bicycle company in like the late 1890s. And it has these 4 women characters kind of with 4 different hair colors. So what I love about that is that it shows that there wasn't one specific hair type really ever, one specific hair color that was the only one that was acceptable. You had blonde, red, black, brown, you name it. But their hair is loose and flying in the wind, and that is very much a male fantasy, and selling bicycles to men in the same way that you see these advertisements for cigarettes. I mean, you have really racy advertisements for cigars because they're aimed at a male audience. But in reality, hair would have been a little bit looser when women were riding bicycles because it was an outdoor activity and you could get away with a looser hairstyle, but it wouldn't really be like flying down your back or like reaching your shoulders.
Yeah. This is a good point, I think, to ask you what materials you were using to write this book, because it wasn't just American painters and paintings. What are some of your sources that helped you develop this idea of what life was like and what hair was like at that time?
I spent a lot of time flipping through periodicals, magazines, popular magazines from the 19th century, and talk about a great way to get lost for a few hours if you have interest in history really at all. There's so much. But I can flip through these magazines like Godey's Ladies Book, Peterson's, Frank Leslie's, and I'll also flip through French magazines from the period, which were really, really fashionable. And they have these gorgeous, beautiful, watercolored by hand fashion plates, and get a sense of what the hairstyles were. So France was always influencing the United States when it comes to hair. And so I can see by comparing the French magazines to the American magazines where the styles were coming from. So that's one visual material that I use in addition to paintings and miniature paintings, watercolors. I also look at trade cards, which are fascinating. So trade cards are basically business calling cards that were printed in multiples. So they're out there in the thousands. There's certain companies for hair manufacturers that put out these trade cards, and they're just, if you go to any library database, like you'll come across them. But I had the great pleasure and honor of winning 2 research fellowships. So I spent time at the Winterthur Museum and Library in Delaware, and then also at the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, Massachusetts. Having grown up in Massachusetts, friends of mine keep saying, oh, that sounds like a really dusty place in Worcester. And I'm like, actually, no, it's incredible. It's like a mini Library of Congress. But both of those libraries have really rich resources in this time period. And I spent a lot of time looking at the trade cards there.
So trade cards aren't like trading like a baseball card. It's more like they were advertising their services through these
advertising your trade services. Yeah. I mean, but women's history is always so fascinating and like takes twists and turns. So some women would collect the cards and they would put them into their Victorian scrapbooks. So you can see them in scrapbooks too. So trading multiple dimensions.
So this is both how you learned about what people were doing with hairstyling at that time, but also how women of that era would know what styles were going on and what other people were doing. But it seems like that's a really pivotal era of things changed. Like the salon industry and the beauty industry in America just got its start then. What were the big shifts culturally that were happening in like the beauty sphere at that time?
Beauty and hair care really gets off to a jump start after the Civil War. And when you hit this period in United States history of industrialism, and there's just massive amounts of wealth coming in through the railroad, and think Gilded Age television show here. So railroad, petroleum, silver mining, just a lot of industrialism, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of self-reliance on U.S. business as opposed to like imports. And one of the areas that I found, along with certainly cosmetics from that period, it was the hair industry. So hair products really take a boom after 1875 especially. And so this is where it gets really fun to spend time in the magazines, is that the advertisements will take up 3 or 4 pages in the back. And it's so fun. It's like just a wealth of information about what women were doing. So there's like hair removal, there's advertisements for corsets, there's tons of whitening powders and complexion powders. And then there are shampoos and hair restorers and what the equivalent of serums would be. I mean, everything's called a restorer. There were hair dyes.
Lots of tonics.
So many tonics. So many tonics, lots of pomades. Pomades did cross over from men to women a little bit, but the words that come up the most are restorers and other kind of like fixing agents. So all of these products are promising to do the same things. They're promising to restore the health of your hair, as if assuming that everybody had lost the health of their hair and that's why they're going into the marketplace to buy something, or to ward off gray hair, or of course to reverse gray hair. So it's
things have not changed, have they?
Things have not, like what's old is new again. Like there's direct through lines from 1870 to now.
You mentioned that pomades went from men and then started being used by women, but let's talk about gender a bit, because I was always of the thinking that like, oh, genders were always completely separate when it comes to caring for hair and or going to places where you would get your hair cared for. But from your book, I was like, oh, wait, it wasn't always like that? So tell me what was going on with like the gender norms at that time.
One of the big discoveries of this research over the course of a few years was that I found that the world of hair was not as gendered as we might have once thought. So the history of barbering is really well researched. There's a couple of excellent books on barbering.
Oh, what's that? The men's history is really well researched, but not so much.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. So from that studying of the archive, we think that men were running the hair industry, but they weren't. So men's barbering is happening, and then you have women who are coming in with proto hair salons. We can call them salons, that's okay, but they were really proto salons.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they were called hair rooms, which I love. So women would advertise their hair rooms. They were renting space in, say, a walk-up in downtown New York and offering hair services in what they call these hair rooms, which to me just sounds like really like more domestic and kind of cozy. But what I found was that since in the period the ideal for white women was, the European ideal standard was for women to have long, luxurious locks, healthy, thick hair, and you wanted it to be like past your shoulders, maybe even reaching your waist, so that you had enough to work with to wrap it up into these really styled updos, like really abundant updos with braids and twists and jewelry to fit in there. And so there wasn't a whole lot of cutting going on. So what was happening in these hair spaces was mostly styling and dressing. However, if a woman needed to have a cut, there was also really like an obsession with split ends, which is fascinating. So women were really aware of their split ends. So they might like snip them at home or have a sister do it or a friend or their mother do it at home. But they also went to male barbers to have their split ends cut. So it was totally acceptable for a woman to go into a barber shop run by a man and have her hair cut there. And we were talking earlier about resource material that I use. Novels come into play, of course. And so if you think of Little Women, Jo March gets her hair. She cuts her hair off. Yeah, it's like this big pivotal moment. She gets her hair cut off and she sells her hair so that she can help fund her family while their father is off in the Civil War. And the illustrations in multiple editions of Little Women show this character of Jo with a male barber cutting her hair. So you have the evidence there. It's all out there. It's just what we look for, right? And like you said about history privileging the men's point of view and men's subjects, there's so much more to do. It's not that there's a bias across the board, but that's where I get really excited, is looking and reading against the grain, looking at these images and seeing, oh, Jo's sitting in a male barbershop and the male barber's wife is sitting next to her. Like, this is a mixed gendered space.
Speaking of history privileging a certain group, you did a lot of work researching the difference between the races in America at that time, which was, of course, a pivotal time in race relations in America. But that the Black hair salons and white hair salons were not, if you were middle class and above, were not necessarily separate, right? Like there was a lot of mixing in that area as well.
We think so. I think so. From the evidence, I still need to do more research on this. But what I can say,
by the way,
is that
you're academic. The way every time I read something, I could see you academically writing like, this is how we're going to look at this through the context of history, so that we're not completely sure, but maybe. And I was like, girl, I like this theory. Go with it. But I understand that's not what historians do.
Thank you. I won't hesitate the next time. But I always have to be careful. I always have to be careful. Even when I say Gilded Age, I usually say so-called Gilded Age because there was just such a discrepancy between wealth in that period.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's okay for our purposes to use some of these terms. So, right, in these salons and barbershops, as far as like the mixed classes, so we talked about the mixed gender.
Right.
And with the mixing of the classes, there's more that I need to do on that. But what I know for sure is that there were products that were being put out by Black and mixed race women, like this one figure who's a hero figure of the book, who I'm sure I'll talk about again, is Christiana Carteaux Bannister. And what we know about hair entrepreneurs like her is that they were making hair products, these restorers, these tonics, shampoos, for Black and mixed race women in their community, but also selling them to white women. So there is this really fascinating mixing of interest in certain ingredients, really, for hair.
And a lot of this, let's talk about Christiana, because I'm obsessed with her, because I feel like in the beauty world that I've studied and written about, you hear about a couple characters in the beauty industry again and again, one of them being Madam C.J. Walker. And I was like, this is 2 generations before Madam C.J. Walker. And you even get into where she came from and what her connection to some of these people were. But there were so many industrious women in the late 1800s in America starting beauty businesses. And a lot of them, like you said, were mixed race and African-American heritage. But Christiana, part of what I love too, by the way, guys, is that she basically funded her husband's life. That was just like, this woman started businesses, was selling products, opening salons so that her husband could go paint. Or am I just being like, that's not really it?
No, you got it. And
kind of, right?
You got it. So coming from this, art historic background, how did I find Christiana Carteaux? I found her through her husband. So I was studying for my oral exams. And when you're doing this period, you have to do landscape painting. And so Edward Mitchell Bannister is a fairly well-known landscape painter, Black painter, and he started as a barber. So how did he have enough funding to switch out of barbering and pursue his passion of landscape painting? Well, it was through the success of his wife. And Christiana was a hairdresser. She has some extended family who were in the wig making business. We're talking about Massachusetts and Rhode Island now. So specifically, she had hair rooms in Boston and also Providence, Rhode Island. So first of all, she was like multiple city entrepreneur. So she was going back and forth. She's of African-American background and Native American.
Yeah, Narragansett. I was like...
Narragansett, yeah.
These are areas I know just because I grew up in the Northeast, but keep going.
That's right. Yes. So she's going back and forth between Providence and Boston. And so she does hair, she dresses hair, also puts out a line of her own hair products that are advertised relentlessly in the newspapers, including emancipation newspapers that were one called The Liberator, which you'll come across a lot. Her ads are running every other day. And this is sort of how you track people who have been lost to history and bring them back into the history books, is sort of tracing some of this visual material. So we don't have any bottles of her hair product or even empty bottles, which there are empty bottles of other hair products from the period. So that's where the eBay activity comes in on my end, but nothing for her. So the only visuals I have are from newspapers from the period. She puts out a hair restorer and a shampoo that she advertises as having all natural ingredients, which a lot of people say, but she specifically says that it has bark from trees from the forest and
so specific.
I know, it's very specific, and other natural ingredients from plants. Everybody has plants and herbs that go into their hair products. So she puts them out, she sells them. She's probably selling them door to door, also selling them in the hair room. So when her clients come to her, they can buy it right there on the spot. Very smart. And then this is what I love. So when she goes between Boston and Providence, she's serving clients in two different cities. So in the newspaper, she tells her clients when she's going between the cities so that it's like, don't make an appointment with me in Boston because I'm going to be in Providence. But if you want to buy my hair products, go down the hall. Mrs. Smith has them while I'm away.
This would be in the newspaper. This is like social media before social media. She was doing like a status update.
Status update. Yes,
right?
A status update in like the Liberator newspaper. I love that. And it was 6 weeks. It was 6 weeks at a time. I mean, my hairdresser goes 6 weeks sometimes to Mexico and then back and like tells me, don't make an appointment while I'm in Mexico.
How modern of her though, because that is sort of how it is now with some hairdressers who might have salons in two cities.
Yeah,
I saw in one of the ads that you had read that she called herself the hair doctress.
Oh, yes. She calls herself the hair doctress, and several people claim to be doctors. So there was no FDA, there was no copyright at the time. You could trademark yourself and call yourself whatever the heck you wanted. She calls herself the hair doctress. There's another woman, Sarah Chevalier, who puts out lots of products, and she puts out a whole like manual and tutorial pamphlet, of which there are originals in the Winterthur Library, which were incredible to flip through. But she calls herself a doctor. There's no evidence that she was in a medical school. Like I even had somebody try to find that.
Oh, really? Oh, I could have told you that. I'd be like, that's marketing. Come on, we know what the beauty industry does.
I know. Call yourself a doctor. And then it's interesting because the women would call themselves doctors, and some of the men advertising would call themselves professor so-and-so. So, I mean, it's just like a trope at the time.
Yeah. And what's cool, though, is she used all this money she was making not just to fund his career, but she was quite the abolitionist. That's why I was like so surprised. I was like, she's an advocate and she was an activist, but yet we didn't hear about her. Like she was in no history books, really.
Yeah.
It takes like combing through advertisements for beauty products to see who the characters of this time were.
And everything you just said, like, isn't that the power of the beauty industry? Like, think about that. Like, I mean, I'm restoring this woman's history and her impact on the market and on like activism and politics by going to beauty products because of her foresight in advertising in newspapers. I mean,
there was no like Smithsonian then, right? Like the American government wasn't at all saving things as part of popular culture, right?
Smithsonian is coming in right about that time. But for her, remember that she's half Black, half Native American. I mean, there's no way any of her stuff would make it into the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And there's historical societies like Massachusetts Historical Society, Rhode Island Historical Society. They do a great job with collecting things. But as you said, with Madam C.J. Walker, she's usually the figure that we think about most when we think about entrepreneurs, Black women entrepreneurs in the hair industry. So she comes around the turn of the century, and there was that Netflix show called
how did they do with the history?
Did you see that?
Of course.
So, I mean, I think they did a great job. I was talking with another historian who said, oh, they totally over-exaggerated the rivalry between Madam C.J. Walker and that tension. I mean, right, you need to have like You need to have a story arc there. But I think they did a great job capturing that kind of entrepreneurial spirit and also the door-to-door sales, which were happening in that moment. But like you said, Christiana Carteaux Bannister and her colleagues, she had other colleagues. She's not the only one. And she also had extended family members. She didn't have any children, but she has nieces who were also in this like wig making in Salem, Massachusetts. And they were taking over her products when she started to decline. The end of her story is a little depressing, but the nieces take over her product line for a couple of years, and then it totally fades out when
After she dies.
Bannister, she dies in 1902, and just everything just fades out.
She was just sort of like lost to history. So it was so fun to spend time with her in your book and like hear her story.
Thank you. I try to thread her through as sort of one of these hero figures. It's a nonfiction book, but, these women are so fascinating that she really touches on all the main themes of the book.
She does. One of the other themes, actually, you just mentioned she's a wig maker. So can we talk about wigs for a second? Because you went real deep on like the amount of hair was imported and where it was imported from. And I think it's so interesting throughout history. This has always been one of those trades that's just sort of like, you can't find a lot of information on it. Like even to this day, I wrote a story like when I was at Mary Claire about wig making in the Orthodox Jewish community. And it was like, it can get shady. There's like dealings with guns and like arms. Like human hair is it's not a commodity. It's like a specialty product. But you said people were at that time, it wasn't like George Washington era powdered wig, right? But they were using hair pieces. What was going on with like fake hair? Extensions, if you will.
They were extensions. Yeah, they were accessories. So they were sew in pieces of hair that if you did not have naturally lustrous, like abundant hair, but you wanted to achieve the look of the day, you could buy fake hair pieces, fake braids, and then clip them into or sew them into your hair, use multiple hairpins, just like a lot of sales of hairpins happening at the time. Clip those in to get the look that you wanted. And so you could order, there was a lot of mail order happening. You could order a fake hair braid. So we'll call it fake hair. But if you had enough of your own hair combings, you would keep the combings like maybe in this little dish called a hair combing dish. I know. Oh, yeah. And you could also buy a hair combing jacket.
Okay, so I'm collecting my hairball. Keep going.
You have to collect your hairball. So like you're combing your hair because it was thought that you could keep the scalp clean, which is true.
Yeah.
Keep the scalp clean, keep your hair clean by doing a lot of combing, but then you would keep the pieces that came out, collect them in a hairball in your hair dish, and then what you could do is package that up and put it in an envelope to a hair specialist and ask for a braid to be made with your hair, fashioned in such a way that it could be attached to like a hair comb that you could shove into your hair. So that's one way if you had enough.
How long would it take you to collect enough shed hair to then send it off and get a thick braid back, do you think?
A thick braid. I mean, it depends on what kind of hair you have. So
what patience.
Yeah, I know. So you could get this braid made to you. The other reason why you're sending your own hair through the mail was so that the maker could match your hair color as best she could. Okay, so if she needed to add some extra hair from somebody else's combings, like if someone sold their combings to her, then she would want to match the color as best as possible. And if you didn't, hair was expensive. These, as you said, like this market is really opaque. It's really, really difficult to get to the bottom of in that period and apparently today too. Mm-hmm. But if you didn't have the funds, you could buy really fake hair. So it might be made with some animal hair or even like some hemp or something like that and made into a braid. But yeah, I like how you mentioned the patience, because not only is it the patience of combing out your hair, waiting for your hair to grow, but also the patience of sending these hair samples through the mail and then waiting your turn while the professional woman, like accessory maker, is making your specific piece. So you might get it back in the mail like a month later.
All right, let's keep going on patience, hair drying. I was fascinated to learn that they had like jackets that they wore while they were drying their hair to keep their clothes from getting wet. Because in my head, I was just like, oh yeah, your hair just dries. I mean, I knew they didn't have blow dryers, right? Because the blow dryer wasn't invented until...
That's going to come around 1890.
Okay, so in this time period. But before that, didn't they get fans out? What were they doing?
I don't know if they had fans. That's such a good question.
I just kept trying to picture it. And I was just like, okay, you go to one of these hair rooms.
Yeah.
And I know you said the washing was very separate from the dressing. So like it would be two different people. But like the in-between period, you're just going to sit there for 2 hours to wait for it to dry?
So I think what was advertised and what these etiquette books were really telling women to do, all of these etiquette books say that air drying is best. I mean, again, like what's old is new again, right? Like everyone's like air drying now, or like go on TikTok and it's like wash it the day before, like clump it, like whatever all those things, those scrunchy things are that they're doing. But it's like all about the air drying. And so women were spending a lot of time drying their hair by a window, like if you had the sun coming in, and if it were warm enough outside, depending on what part of the country you were in, you would go outside and dry your hair outside. And what I love about this is that it was so social. So if you had sisters or friends come over, you might have like a wash day together and wash your hair outside with like egg yolk shampoo, like use a bucket, have a friend help rinse it out, which must have taken forever, and then air dry outside. And it was really sweet. Like these etiquette books recommend reading a book or a magazine or telling stories or knitting or crocheting while you're waiting for your hair to dry. So like women are like out there together having a little social gathering while their hair's drying. I get that.
Yeah, well, that feels very universal. Yeah. But as, these class differentiations are coming more into play, there are these hair rooms and then there's these salons. So you found lots of imagery of what a salon would be like during this time period. There's this one in Chicago. I don't know if you remember. Of course you remember. It's your book.
Maybe,
I was just like, it looked like royals. It looked like it was like this high ceiling and like all these thrones. They look like thrones. I think it might have been a men's barber shop. But like, what was a typical middle class kind of salon that a woman would go to like at that time period? Like what furniture would be there even? Or sinks? Were there sinks? I don't know.
The sinks are really fun to research. The middle-class salon would have individual workstations. Like so much of this is familiar today. Individual workstations. The chairs would be ordered from a barbering catalog. So again, like barbering's more advanced. They have manufacturers who are putting out hardcore heavy metal furniture and equipment. And so women's salons would order 1 or 2 chairs from these barber catalogs, and you could get all the finishes that you wanted. These were like brass, and you could get copper finishes on the chair. I love the cushioned seats. You could choose your covering, like your fabric upholstery covering. So like green velvet was one of the options. And they reclined and they had headrests and the feet went up. They were made to last, and they did last. They were heavy investments for people who were owning salons and barbershops. So you get these, and then also the sinks are crazy. So the sinks were in front instead of in back. So if you were getting your hair washed in the salon, you would be flipping your hair forward and putting your hair into the sink in front of you, and then your stylist is behind you instead of like going back the way that we do today. And so the sinks are like porcelain, like
because your head's in it, so you gotta like make it look nice for the client.
Yeah. And then they're on like these really beautiful wood, like mahogany stands that hold the sinks up. And then you can get really fancy if you had a larger salon, and you could get these sink setups where there's like 3 or 4 sinks around,
like a communal trough,
unit.
Or something.
I love that. So you could have like 3 clients in the bowl at the same time.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe they've got only so much hot water, but they would have running water, right? If it was like a nice...
In the U.S., if they had the plumbing, then they would have the running water. And that is one of the differences that comes into play between French salons and American salons. The plumbing is newer in the U.S. And I mean, when you look into history, it's like all of a sudden you're into like plumbing history and you're into like mail service history, postal service history. But it can be really fascinating. So the United States had more up-to-date buildings and architecture, so they had more running water. If you had up-to-date plumbing, you could have warm water running into those sinks. In France or in other countries in Europe, you may not have that plumbing in place, and so it would be more manual with taking like buckets of water and beautiful buckets of water and running them over your client's head.
But that even helps start to play into like why a middle class is appearing because we had plumbing and indoor bathrooms and these things, but those would only be for the very rich in Europe, whereas here it would be more accessible, which I didn't think about till just now.
Right. Just now, there's this connection between domestic architecture and vernacular business architecture. Yeah.
Yeah. We skimmed over the products a little bit, the elixirs and the restorers and things. Were there any others that stood out to you as you were doing your research? Like, what is this?
Oh, they're so great. They're so great. There's one restorer called the Martha Washington Restorer.
Okay, wait. So as over the first lady of the United States, Martha Washington?
Yeah, Martha Washington.
Don't remember what she looked like, but okay.
I know, right? I mean, she's not like the icon, the beauty icon that you probably would think of.
President Cleveland's wife was like, she was an it girl? I had no idea.
She was an it girl. She was a trendsetter. So Frances Folsom Cleveland, she's, I think, 19 years old, 20 years old when she marries sitting President Grover Cleveland in 1886. I believe. Yes. And she's a real beauty. And so she sets some trends with hairstyles. She has this dark curly hair and she sets like the style with, it's called the Cleveland bang. And then you could actually buy false Cleveland bangs and like attach them to your head to get this like look. But there's tons of images of her that people can Google pretty easily and also see in my book. So she sets that style.
Okay, if it's Cleveland, this 1880s, like what would be the products that a woman would be using around that time period?
Seven Sutherland Sisters Restorer is one of them.
That was the hot stuff. Okay.
That was like really hot. They had a full line of products. So Seven Sutherland Sisters were this like girl group, basically. They were actual sisters, but they sang, they entertained, but they were known for their really, really long, to the floor, dark hair. And their father kind of like put them out there and was like their manager. And so they're traveling around the country, entertaining. They're traveling around even with Barnum and Bailey Circus, but they are known for putting out these incredible hair products. So what were they made of? Mostly alcohol. So when I look at the labels and some of those you were talking about the Smithsonian Institution, some of those labels and bottles for the Seven Sutherland Sisters still exist.
Okay.
And so you can see what the ingredients were. There's just like 30 to 40% alcohol in them. And then you might have like some castor oil. You might have some olive oil in them. So what they're actually doing, it's hard for me to tell. And this is why I love talking to hair stylists today and like product manufacturers and like, what were they going for? And what they may have been going for was like to clean the scalp and to like remove buildup. I mean, it sounds like words we use today with products. That may have been what they were going for with that alcohol. But then there's other products that have really dangerous ingredients in them. So like you get basically like gas, like flammable ingredients in some of these products, which is not great because, again, they weren't being regulated the way they are today.
No, but like Tar shampoos is a long history of using coal byproducts because they get rid of the little beasties. And like if you had seborrheic dermatitis or what, they didn't probably know what that was then, but those treatments do help with those kind of things.
So I was just looking at one that has salicylic acid in it. And I'm like, I have that in multiple products in my home right now. I mean, what goes around comes around. And that's like one thing that I feel like I have kind of this X-ray vision now when I see a hair product on a shelf and like Ulta or Sephora, like I see all the same wording, or it's like all the promises are the same and a lot of the ingredients are the same. I mean, except for some of the flammable ones, I guess.
Speaking of the same, as you're talking about the Seven Sutherland Sisters, they were like proto-Kardashians. We've got the alliteration of like Kim, Chloe, whatever all their names are. That. They sell products. They're not traveling entertainers. I mean...
And the proto like selfie, they would go around to these events across the country and women would pose with them and take photographs with them because they were celebrities.
Which you might, with the eye of history, be like, that's silly. Go to Ulta Beauty for like any beauty founder who has like an event there and everybody just wants to stand next to them and take a picture.
Absolutely. I know. And people would take pictures with them. And then what I love...
Such an American idea, isn't it?
Yeah, phenomenon, totally.
Yeah.
To be like there with them.
And the self-made, like the entertainment, but making money out of it. And
Yeah. And even with like their manager was their father, right?
Their momager, but there was their dadager.
Their dadager. I know. It's just trying to like go through the notes in my head and see if I know anything about the mother. She might have passed away because it's the dad that's mentioned the most.
The Sutherlands. Well, as you did your research, did you find yourself, you said you go to stores now and you can like see that things have changed but are still the same. Did it change the way you think about your own hair or your own grooming practices?
Yes. So I think about like the oils that they use. So I have really like curly hair that gets dry. And so I need products that are going to like provide moisture. They're going to weigh my hair down in a good way and are going to defrizz my hair. So I'm all about just like those natural oils. So whether or not they're of the moment and like fashionable or cool, I will like go for an argan oil. Like, is argan oil cool right now? I don't know, but I need it. So I use it. Or anything with olive oil or shea butter, that's my thing. And all of these just go right back. The one thing I won't put in my hair from that time period are egg yolks, which were like just incredibly popular.
Yeah, why are they so into egg yolks? I guess it's like a stiffening agent. It's like hairspray, right?
I asked a hairdresser about that. I'm like, what were they going for? And he said that it was probably moisture for the scalp, but it would have been, they say, like these advertisements say that the egg yolk will turn into like a lather, like all these etiquette books.
Oh, right, because the egg yolk, the yellow part would be more like a surfactant, whereas the egg white would be like a setting product.
I think that's what it is.
You know, the swimmers, what do they call it now? They changed the name of the synchronized swimming. They put egg whites to shellac their hair, gelatin sometimes, I think gelatin now, to like make it shellacked and waterproof.
Oh, I've seen those on TikTok. And I didn't realize that that's what they were using. So for the lather, like, I don't know what was happening there, but I just think about like how it must have been really hard to rinse those things out. But yeah, so I just look for like those, I just go for like natural, and I don't like anything with a heavy scent. That's my thing. Whereas back in the day, in the 19th century, everything had a perfume in it.
Yeah. Was there anything else coming out of this book that you were just like, it just changed the way you think about even your job, your day-to-day job, looking at paintings and things like that? Looking at paintings as if that's your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or like reading writings about paintings. I'm still fascinated by, and this is what Beyond Vanity tries to counter, is that looking at paintings, portrait paintings, I'm still just fascinated by the fact that most people spend more time thinking about the painter and the technique of the painting rather than the choices that the woman would have been making about her presentation. And a major part of how someone presents themselves is how they present their hair style. And like I said, a woman of a certain class and respectability level would not be walking out of the house without her hair done. If you had plans that day and you couldn't get an appointment with your hairdresser, or your lady's maid couldn't do the hairstyle that you wanted, you were not going to the opera that night. It regulated how you presented yourself, whether or not you left the home. And for that to be overlooked in portraiture, there's more work to be done, but I can say I'll never understand it, but I do understand it. Hair is always last. We look at fashion, we look at cosmetics, we look at skincare now, but for some reason, hair has always been regarded as somehow trivial or frivolous, and I am working really hard to reverse that.
Okay, before you go though, I'm gonna link to your book so everybody knows where to find it and everything, but I have to do the Fat Mascara 5 with you, which we do with all of our guests, little speed round. What was the first beauty product you remember really loving and using?
There was this Clinique moisturizer. I probably had a sample size, but it was yellow.
DDL. It's a classic. Dramatically different.
It was a classic. Thank you.
That's a good one. Okay, we asked this of a lot of guests lately, but I was like, oh, you'll have a good answer. What piece of art will you never be bored by?
There's a painting by Winslow Homer in the Met called Snap the Whip, and it is a rural setting at like a one-room schoolhouse, and the children are outside playing basically like Red Rover, Red Rover.
Uh-huh.
And I could stare at it for hours. I love the movement. I love the colors. I love the children's faces.
Wait, so is it on display right now at the Met?
Yeah, it's always on display at the Met.
Do you work at the physical museum? Like, can you go pop over and just stare at it if you want to?
Yeah, my office is in the main building. Yep.
How delightful. What a delight. Okay, so let's say you have a podcast, or maybe you're going to a dinner party or whatever, who would be your dream guest? Someone that you'd want to talk to for an hour?
Tracy Ellis Ross.
Oh, fun. Why?
I need to ask her, like, how did you wear your hair in high school? What was it like? Because she's such a hair icon, and she has this beauty line, this hair care beauty line that I'm also obsessed with called Pattern Beauty.
Yes.
There's this styling cream that I just love. It just like speaks to me. And I want to like ask her, and she did that incredible show, Blackish, and her hair was a main character on that show. And she speaks out like she's an activist for all people should be able to wear their hair however they want in the workplace, in schools. And so she's one of my heroes, and I would just love to talk with her.
Oh, I love that. She's a really good interview, I can tell you. She's been on the show, and she's everything you would want her to be. So
yes, dream.
Okay, moving on. What is your favorite snack?
Those Trader Joe's sesame crackers.
Oh, okay. Classic.
Yeah.
Trader Joe comes up a lot when we ask this question. So the sesame crackers?
Yeah, they've sort of taken over like the snack corner of my life. Yeah.
That's a good one. Okay, last one. It's like 11 a.m. on your day off. What would you be doing?
I'm kind of obsessed with, so I'm a real sunscreen nerd, and I could be like in the aisle of like Ulta just checking out sunscreens, or even just like CVS. And if there's an upscale pharmacy, so like down the street we have Zitimer.
Oh yeah, Zitimer.
Yeah, I mean, so like me and the sunscreen.
I feel like Zitimer got started in the period that your book is placed. Zitimer's like been around. It's a New York institution.
It's a New York institution, and let me tell you, there's this staircase that goes to the second floor. Like there are posters from the 1990s in there that I'm obsessed with. These need to be on TikTok very soon. But they just have like the European sunscreen. Like I'm obsessed with European sunscreen.
You can't just drop that on me in the end. Which ones? Which European sunscreens are your go-tos?
So I like that Anthelios stuff, and then, which I never know how to pronounce. And then there's also, so sunscreen, but then also Retin-A products from Europe. So, all right, I just have this one here because we were in France.
Oh yeah, tell me what product you use.
Okay, so this, like, do you know this?
Oh yeah, A313, yes.
So is it good?
Yes. So I have a lot of friends that use it because it has a richer base than some of the retinols here that could be, so it counteracts the drying is what I've heard from people. I can't handle a retinoid, but that is like one of those classic beauty editor. If you're in Europe, you buy that ointment.
So the only reason I bought this one, we were in France last week. And so tretinoin is my go-to, but my insurance won't cover tretinoin in the US. So I'm like, oh, fine. Well, I'll just buy it there. Because in Spain, you can get Retin-A or tretinoin, like I forget the brand name because I used it up. And so when we were going to France, I was like, oh, I'll just get it there, as if I thought it would be the same as Spain. But in France, you need a prescription for it, which I just wasn't going to deal with. So they said the next best thing was this. And it has vitamin A in it. And like, so far it's okay, but I'm still needing to get back to Spain.
I have heard from doctors that it is as potent as an over-the-counter in the United States that you could get. Like some people claim it's like, oh, it's basically like prescription level retinoid. I don't know if that's true, but until you can get back to Spain, though the trip to Spain is going to cost more than the non-covered tretinoin, I feel like, in the United States.
I know. That's exactly what my husband said. He's like, so you're going to buy airfare
to go travel to buy.
I know. Because I obviously didn't buy enough when we went to Spain last year. But yeah, so I'm a huge like sunscreen person and Retin-A.
So Anthelios, that's is that La Roche-Posay, I think?
It's La Roche-Posay. And then, I don't know, I got this other one. I don't even think it's European. Koa, K-O-A, is that one. I just love a zinc. I like the zinc.
Koa sunscreen is the other one that you like?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know it.
I like that. And then in the U.S., just Ulta MD, like all day long. Elta MD.
Yeah, the clear or the tinted?
Never the tinted. And how many times have I ordered the tinted by mistake?
I don't know, but the packaging is very similar, so I could see that happening.
They need to redo that.
And they're both like SPF 46 or whatever it is.
Yeah, they go for like the 40 and the 46, and then I end up with that tinted. No tint. No.
Okay, the clear one. Ulta MD Clear. Oh, you know your stuff. Okay. And I have to ask before you go then, you said Patterns curl cream. Is that your like go-to stuff?
I love that. That's a little heavily scented for me. Like I said, I'm really sensitive to the scents in these things. So I love the JVN air dry cream, which I feel like is just made for my hair type. And then when I said that I like a heavy ingredient like shea butter, that for me is Fekkai. So Fekkai shea butter, they have a shampoo and then they have like a super thick mask that I'm obsessed with. I like it better than the JVN mask. I like it better than like the pattern mask.
Don't worry, he might not be listening to this episode. It's totally fine.
I know. Okay.
So the Fekkai shea butter mask is like your go-to mask.
Yeah. It's like, so it's in a pot, like a really big pot. And so if you have really thick hair, like you need, that's another thing I love about Tracee Ellis Ross is that she knows that in her beauty line that people with thick textured hair need a lot of product. And so it'll be like
a nice tub.
A nice tub. And like if you're in the shower and like your hands are wet, like you can still get a lot. And Fekkai does that with the shea butter mask and also with the shampoo. Like it's a generous size. And he doesn't call it, sorry, I'm going on and on.
That's literally what this podcast is about.
No, I know.
The one place where you never have to worry about obsessing about beauty products. Like no one's judging you here.
Because he doesn't like call it something that you're never going to remember and you're never going to find like in the store. It simply says shea butter shampoo, shea butter mask. Like, yes, don't call it something crazy that I'm never going to remember. And don't put it in like
Seven Sisters Restorer Tonic.
Martha Washington Restorer Tonic. Like, don't call it like a mouthful. Just give me that ingredient, like that. I don't know if you can call that an active ingredient, but the main ingredient. Just tell me straight up what it is and give me a nice size quantity for the price that I'm paying. And I'm with you forever. Yes.
It's good advice if any marketers are listening. I don't know if like with the trademarks that's always possible, but yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so Fekkai shea butter mask. I love that. Wow, we got like at the end, we got a whole beauty, like an inside your beauty kit too. I love that. Your book's great. I'm so glad you had some time to spend with us on Fat Mascara. Thank you.
Thank you. This was totally a dream.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
It's your reviews and feedback that help us make the podcast even better. Head over to iTunes to rate and review us or email your thoughts to info@fatmascara.com.
We also want to answer your beauty questions and hear what products you love. To share a Raise the Wand product review or to ask a beauty question, email us at info@fatmascara.
If you send it as a voice memo file, we can even share your voice on the podcast. You can also do that by leaving us a voice message. Our phone number in the United States is 646-481-8182.
Thanks so much for listening.